We are living in a most momentous and perilous time. An old order is passing away. What is to come next, though, seems uncertain. The jet-setting billionaire elites, the so-called Davos crowd, have decided that the era of the nation-state is over. The globalists fully intend to bring about a great reset, which is a euphemism for the collapse of the economic system and the implementation of what will surely be global communism, where everyone will be happy with nothing, or so said one of their spokesmen. The COVID emergency has been seized upon by the conspirators as the golden opportunity to crush capitalism and democracy. Rightly so. More and more people are looking with a suspicious eye at the heavy-handedness of lockdowns and the irrational push for universal vaccinations. The seeming inevitability of mandatory vaccine passports has Bible-oriented people wondering if this may be connected with what the Bible book of Revelation reveals about the mark of the beast. The reason being, the book of the Apocalypse foretells that no one will be able to buy or sell unless they have the mark of the beast on their hand or forehead. Meanwhile, Western civilization, America especially, seems to be under siege. The fabric of society is being intentionally ripped apart by the behind-the-scenes manipulators. There's even talk of civil war. More disconcerting, though, is the continued deterioration of relations between the nuclear powers. There are any number of conflict zones, so-called hotspots, that could easily trigger another world war. A war that will most assuredly involve weapons of mass destruction. Mankind is being deliberately plunged into a new dark age. Just a little more than a century ago, the world was a much different place, at least on the surface. The highest level of technology was the telegraph and steam-powered locomotives. So-called gas buggies and crude aircraft were just coming on the scene. The development of electric power generation and transmission and the use of oil-based fuel was the driving force. And it still is. But now, artificial intelligence and robotic technology, along with control of computer-generated money, has developed to the point that once useful tools are no longer a servant for the common good, but are being perverted to enslave mankind. Although scientific discoveries and the rapid development of technology has revolutionized our way of life, the insurmountable problem is that on a fundamental level, humanity has not changed, at least not for the better. Greed, hatred, wickedness still prevail, and the rich get richer, and the poor are always left to suffer. The powers that be have determined that the greatest threat to the continued existence of mankind is mankind itself. Supposedly, an invisible gas is menacing the world in the form of excess carbon dioxide, which is an innocuous gas necessary for all plants to use in the miraculous wood and food-producing process of photosynthesis, in which pure oxygen is the byproduct. And of course, CO2 is exhaled by all breathing creatures. So, according to the climate alarmist, there are too many breathers. In order to save Earth for future generations, the wealthiest men have determined that the vast majority of humans must be eliminated. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is an established policy run through the United Nations that began with the Club of Rome, which was established in 1968. The Club of Rome promoted environmentalism as a front to ultimately eliminate industrialism, not to save the planet, but to drastically reduce the population. Unfortunately, genocide is not new. The communistic bloc, where the working class was also declared to be happy with nothing, they were also exterminated, though, by the tens of millions, by the likes of tyrants like Stalin and Mao and Pol Pot. Genocide is not exclusive to communistic dictators, though. The British monarchy has been wringing its hands about overpopulation as far back as when Queen Victoria ruled over a quarter of the world, when there was less than 1 billion human breathers. And London did its part back then to eliminate millions of people in Ireland, India, and Africa. The so-called Victorian Holocaust took advantage of the weather-related lack of monsoons and forced starvation on over 20 million Indians. But now the population of our race is 10 times greater than when Great Britain ruled over a colonial empire. Given their anti-human bias, it is an ominous reality that now the billionaires grouped around the British Crown have the power to accomplish mass murder on a global scale. And it would appear that their genocidal scheme has already been set into motion through the implementation of their Green New Deal, which involves the cutting off of financing for industries that produce energy. Without coal-fired plants and petroleum, which are the lifeblood of modern civilization, the life-carrying capacity of the present system would be greatly reduced. How did the world come to be in the present state in which it exists? Although it may seem as if human intelligence is the ultimate authority, there is a domain higher than the physical dimension to which we're confined. There is a superior world that cannot be perceived through sense perception. Yes, there is a spirit realm that exists on a higher plane. The highest intelligence dwelling in the invisible dimension is an individual nominally known as God. For those who keep track, his preferred pronouns are he, him, and his. This higher intelligence has remotely authored a book, actually a collection of 66 little books that were written over a period of 1,600 years and have been compiled into a portable library called the Bible. The Bible's author has signed his signature throughout, that being Jehovah in English. Long before men invented airplanes and spacecraft to look down on the earth from high above, Jehovah described the view from his vantage point, revealing thousands of years ago that the earth is a sphere and it hangs upon nothing, and that the human inhabitants of this beautiful planet are as mere grasshoppers to him. Jehovah provides his credentials as the true God by revealing the things to come, hundreds and even thousands of years before they occur. They are written down in his book. Foretelling the future is what prophecy is. No one but God can determine what will be. In fact, in the language of the Jews in which the Old Testament was written, the name Jehovah, more than likely pronounced Yehovah in Hebrew, literally means the one who causes to become. So, more exactly, prophecy is not merely foreseeing the future. Prophecy is a revelation of what God has determined will be. For example, one of the little books in the divine library is Daniel. A spirit messenger, otherwise known as an angel, appeared to him from the invisible while he was in exile in Persia. He revealed to Daniel the general course of history. Beginning with the conquest of Alexander the Great, the angel stated, "And a mighty king will stand up and rule with extensive dominion and do as he pleases. But when he has stood up, his kingdom will be broken and be divided toward the four winds of the heavens, but not to his descendants, and not like the dominion with which he ruled. For his kingdom will be uprooted and go to others besides these." Prior to the angel's revelation, Daniel had had another inspired dream of four separate beasts. One was like a leopard, but on its back it had four wings, like those of a bird. And the beast had four heads, and it was given authority to rule. Well, history confirms that shortly after Alexander conquered Persia, he unexpectedly died in Babylon at the age of 32. And his empire did not pass on to his offspring, but was divided among four of his generals, hence the four winds, the four heads, and the four wings. Eventually, those regions devolved into warring kingdoms. In time, two kingdoms became dominant, Syria and Egypt. Those two kingdoms became the prophetic kings of the north and south. Why north and south? Because they were geographically situated to the north and south of what the angel identified as the splendid kingdom, also called the land of the decoration, which happened to be Israel at that time. Syria was to the north and Egypt to the south. Both Syria and Egypt at different times dominated the splendid kingdom of Judah. At the time of the angel's revelation, Israel did not even exist. Babylon had destroyed Judah and Jerusalem, just as Assyria had brought the 10-tribe kingdom of Israel to ruin more than 100 years before that. But much of Bible prophecy foretold that Jehovah would redeem the Jews from Babylon and bring them back to their homeland. This happened when King Cyrus led the Medes and the Persians and overthrew Babylon in one night. Later, Persian King Darius allowed the Jews to return to Palestine and rebuild Jerusalem and construct a new, if not downsized, temple dedicated to the worship of Jehovah. But God had a greater purpose in mind for Israel. Eventually, the Roman Empire became dominant, and it swallowed up both Syria and Egypt. The Roman Empire took the position of the king of the north, and for a considerable period of time, there was no rival king of the south. For the sake of brevity, we will pick up the development of the timeline of the king of the north at Daniel 11:20. There it says, "And there will stand up in his position one who causes an exactor to pass through the splendid kingdom. But in a few days he will be broken, though not in anger nor in warfare." At this point, although the Jews were allowed considerable autonomy under the rule of the Edomite king Herod, who was Rome's appointed king over Judah, the Jews were nonetheless subjected to the Roman Empire. And as such, Rome extracted monies from its many subjects. No doubt the exactor had to do with a registration for purposes of exacting tax and for conscription. Jesus Christ was born at this time. The Gospel book of Luke states, "Now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus for all the inhabited earth to be registered, and all of the people went to be registered, each one to his own city." Joseph and Mary lived in Nazareth, in the region of the Sea of Galilee, north of Judah. But in order to comply with Caesar's decree, they traveled to the city of Bethlehem, located close to Jerusalem, which was where Mary gave birth to Jesus. This too had been prophesied some 600 years before by the prophet Micah. He wrote, "And you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, the one too little to be among the thousands of Judah, from you will come out to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose origin is from ancient times, from the days of long ago." Shortly after issuing the decree, Augustus died from natural causes, thus not in anger nor in warfare, as the angel revealed. With the birth of Jesus, God's purpose in connection with Israel had nearly been accomplished. God provided the promised one who would present himself to Israel as the Messiah at the age of 30. Although it appeared as if the birth of Jesus was ordinary, Mary knew that she had had no sexual relations with a man. Before she became pregnant, an angel named Gabriel, who had also appeared to Daniel 500 years before, spoke to Mary and explained that she was to give birth to the Son of the Most High and that he would become a great king. That is why Micah said his origin was from ancient times, from the days of long ago. Prior to his birth in a cattle stall in Bethlehem, the infant Jesus had lived in the invisible realm. In fact, Jesus lived before the earth was created. He was the very first creation of Almighty God. The reason these plain biblical facts concerning the origin of Jesus and his relationship with Jehovah are not accepted by the masses of people who claim to be Christian has to do with the cunning of the king of the north. After Augustus came Tiberius Caesar, who was mentioned by name in the Gospel of Luke in connection with the appearance of John the Baptizer and the baptism and anointing of Jesus. Daniel 11:21 says of Augustus's successor, "And there must stand up in his position one who is to be despised, and they will certainly not set upon him the dignity of the kingdom, and he will actually come in during a freedom of care and take hold of the kingdom by means of smoothness." What kingdom did he take control of by means of smoothness? The Jews despised their Roman masters, Even Jesus' loyal Jewish disciples were laboring under the false hope that Jesus was going to throw off the Roman yoke and reestablish the kingdom of David in Jerusalem. Once the Pharisees, who were party followers of Herod, tried to trap Jesus into committing an act of treason against Rome by asking him if it was lawful to pay taxes to Caesar. Jesus responded by asking to see a Roman coin, no doubt bearing the image of Tiberius, whom they despised. Jesus then said to them, "Pay back Caesar's things to Caesar, but God's things to God." In what way did the king of the north take control of the Judean kingdom? By smoothness? The religious leaders of the Jews were committed enemies of Jesus. Facilitated by the traitorous Judas, one of Jesus' own apostles, the Jews and the Romans conspired to arrest and condemn Jesus. After having been interrogated by Herod and Pontius Pilate, both appointed representatives of Tiberius Caesar, the Jews were given the option of accepting Jesus as their king. They refused and instead loudly proclaimed, "We have no king but Caesar." Thus, the unbelieving Jews became allied with their despised masters to do away with the one-born King of the Jews. When Pilate gave the order to have Jesus executed on a stake, the king of the north brought the leader of the covenant to ruin. The King James Version renders Daniel 11:22 this way, "And the arms of the flood, they will be overflown from before him, and shall be broken. Yes, also the prince of the covenant." On the night of his arrest, Jesus had passed the cup of wine among his 11 apostles and explained that it signified the blood of the covenant, that is, the new covenant, which the resurrected Christ became the mediator of. The arms of the flood came in the year 70, when the Roman armies swept Jerusalem away and killed 1 million worshippers who had come from all over to pack the city for the celebration of the Passover. The establishment of the new covenant with the 12 apostles, Judas, of course, was replaced by Matthias, marked the beginning of a new nation, a new spiritual splendid kingdom, as it were, or the land of decoration, which replaced natural Israel founded upon the 12 sons of Jacob. And because of their alliance with him, he will carry on deception and rise up and become mighty by means of a little nation. Jesus referred to this change when he spoke to the Jews, telling them that the kingdom of God was going to be taken from them and given to a nation producing its fruit. He was referring to his congregation as a nation. And indeed, it was a little nation in comparison with the populous nations that had been in existence for many hundreds of years before. With the change from physical Israel to spiritual Israel, or what the Apostle Paul called the Israel of God, in reference to the anointed congregation of Christ, the people signified by the pronoun there must pertain to Christians. And just as Jehovah had intended that the Israelites be a holy nation and a kingdom for his glory, God's purpose was transferred to Christ's kingdom. The Apostle Peter said of them, Christians, "But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for special possession, that you should declare abroad the excellencies of the one who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light." It was by means of this little nation that the king of the north became mighty. How did this happen? Just as faithless Jews had allied themselves with the king of the north, apostate Christians did the same thing. After the apostles died off, wicked men gradually came into positions of leadership. Some began to teach that Jesus was God. This divisive controversy was exploited by the Emperor of Rome as a means to insert himself as the arbiter of the phony dispute. Rome at the time was fragmenting, and there were several warring factions. Constantine schemed to use this religion for his own political purposes. He called all the bishops of the scattered congregations to convene an ecumenical council at Nicaea, in what is now modern-day Turkey. Although he knew absolutely nothing about the teachings of Christ, Emperor Constantine presided over the assembly, and the high priest of pagan worship became the decider of Christian doctrine, declaring Jesus to be the same as God. Prior to Nicaea, Constantine set the deception into motion by legalizing the outlawed religion of Jesus. Although less than 10% of the people in the realm even considered themselves to be Christian, it became the state religion. Having once viciously murdered many thousands of Christian followers in a master stroke, the dying Roman Empire perpetuated itself through deceptively allying with the little nation. When the empire finally dissolved, the pagan office of Pontifex Maximus became the throne of the popes, ruling in the place of Christ. Over the course of several centuries, all of the elements of pagan worship were infused into what was passed off as Christianity. What an immaculate deception! To this day, the mainstream denominations hold to the paganism introduced by the Roman king of the north. During a time of security, he will come into the richest parts of the province and do what his fathers and their fathers have not done. Plunder and spoil and goods he will distribute among them, and against fortified places he will plot his schemes, but only for a time. Under the domination of both the kings of the north and the south prior to Christ, God's land of decoration was never successfully plundered. Under the power of Rome's Pontifex Maximus, even the Bible eventually became the spoils of the king of the north. Where previous kings had failed, the Roman king of the north succeeded. As the original language of Rome fell out of use in Europe, the Vatican prevented the Bible from being translated into languages that the common people could understand. The richness of the spiritual treasures it contained had been plundered, as it were. The Vatican became fabulously wealthy by possessing the keys of knowledge contained in the mysterious book it had secreted away. But what about the king of the south? That will be discussed in the next video.